And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And, the corporate media is having a field day with this, incredible story of the suffering of these three girls. And the more they hammer it, and the more they're using it as a distraction from the economy in Syria and Iran, the more it is going to remind the American people the police cannot, do not, and will not protect you from these criminals. And the courts have ruled repeatedly the police are under no legal obligation to actually intervene to save you from violent crime. Warren versus District of Columbia is the most well-known example of this, but by no means the only isolated incident here. Now, getting over to what's going on in Syria. The leadership of the Syrian hired mercenary army has rejected the call from Russia for a negotiated settlement, which is exactly what Washington, D.C. wants. They don't want a settlement, they want an excuse to invade. They're still trying to figure out how they can get this thing going. Interesting reportage coming from antiwar.com saying the Obama administration's decision to get on board with Russian pushes for a negotiated settlement on Syria's civil war took a serious hit today, with the rebels saying no way. Now, there needs to be a clarification here. The U.S. did not get on board the Russian push for a settlement. After making U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry wait for 3 hours, very obvious diplomatic message right then and there, Vladimir Putin told him in no uncertain terms the same thing Russia had told his predecessor, Hillary Clinton: if you go into Syria or Iran, Russia will turn it into the new Vietnam or the new Afghanistan, and just wear the United States down on a war of attrition that the United States lacks the resources to survive. That's the message it's a consistent message coming out of Russia. In other words, Putin put a brick wall right in front of the U.S. war machine. And Kerry obviously went over there to try and somehow make a deal or talk Russia into standing down. Let us go into Syria. Really, it's just a little tiny place. You won't miss it. And Putin said in no uncertain terms, no, this has gone on long enough. And so in order to save face, John Kerry comes out and says, we, the United States, have agreed with Russia of a negotiated settlement. They want nothing of the kind. And so now the hired mercenary army comes out and says, we won't negotiate. Negotiation is dead, and the U.S. gets to act like it wasn't really what they wanted all along. And so the next step is going to be figuring out how to get this war train back on track, how to demonize Russia, how to find some kind of a political way to keep Russia from intervening in the coming election. I don't think they can find one. Russia obviously feels they stand a decent chance of prevailing in a direct conflict with the United States of America, and they probably do. Russia doesn't spend anywhere near as much on their military as the United States does, but they spend it well. They spend it efficiently. They don't pour $7 billion into developing a weapon system like the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle and then spend billions more trying to fix all the problems with the design until they finally get something that works. And let's see. All righty, a little message from off the air. We'll look at this in just a little tiny bit. So, in fact, let's take a phone call. Steve in Oregon. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, I'm going to be very brief. I got to get out of here. But this morning, that website, DimCAD, that does the 3D printing,
yes,
the feds told him to shut it down just about an hour ago, and it's down now. And so they're taking that off the internet so you can't get to it. Mm-hmm. And so I thought I would mention, too, that I'm hearing it's still on Pirate Bay for those who would like to get it before they take it from there. Okay. And it's already been like 100,000 downloads. And even if you don't like the 3D gun or you don't plan on making one, you should just get it downloaded anyway, just to piss them off.
Yeah, it certainly would. But you know something? Somebody wrote me an email the other day that raises a very good point. This is a printing process. And so, setting aside the issues of the Second Amendment, which guarantees us the right to keep and bear arms, certainly to defend our daughters from being kidnapped by wackos over there in Ohio, but the First Amendment applies here too. If it's a printing process, The right to free speech covers this, because even though printing presses were the only technology that existed back in 1776, the Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that the First Amendment applies to all new technological innovations, including telegraph, telephone, radio, television, computers, and the rest of it. And following that legal precedent, if it's a printing process, if something is being published, the First Amendment right to freedom of speech applies to 3D printing up to and including firearms. And so...
yeah, they're discussing that right now. It's a big legal thing because they're getting in the arms treaty. Oh, man, you wouldn't believe what they're doing. You know the story. But I got to get going, Mike, but thank you. I just wanted to get that info out so that people might want to download it while it's there.
All right, well, definitely thank you very much for that information. And
thank you, Mike.
I'm one of these people, I'm not a big fan of 3D printed guns. It's actually a very labor-intensive, costly process. It's not suitable to mass manufacturing. And being an old-school gunsmith, wood and steel and metal and, brass and everything, and make your own ammo and everything, there are far easier ways to acquire a firearm. It's an interesting technical exercise, but as that one demonstration showed the other day, the plastic guns don't hold up. They're not durable. They will not survive a high-powered round. And if you really think about it, a plastic gun that blows up the second or third time you use it is exactly the kind of gun the government would prefer you have versus these military-style guns that the U.S. government has been spending your tax money on to give to the drug gangs through Operation Fast and Furious. But under both the First and Second Amendments, you have a right to this technology and to use it for whatever you want to do. Up until the point where you use that gun for a criminal action, the U.S. government doesn't have any legal ground to do this. It is clearly unconstitutional. I hope somebody is able to fund a legal challenge that will go right up to the United States Supreme Court. And again, we're starting to see our government respond to new technologies the way the governments and religious institutions tried to respond when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing. Oh, we can't have this flow of information in the public. They're going to start figuring out all the scams and the lies, and they're going to see all the problems. We've got to shut it down. We've got to take control of it. And, of course, that failed. The technological genie is out of the box, or out of the bottle, or whatever they keep the genies in. And I think shutting down this website is going to be a public relations disaster for the United States government. Because even as the government is buying all this hollow point ammunition, and by the way, somebody made a really good point. If the Department of Homeland Security is saying this is just for training, can't they use simulators? Or can't they use cheaper, non-hollow point ammunition for their training? They're just lying about this stuff. They're preparing to go to war against the 50 states, and they're trying to disarm you any way they can. The Nazis did exactly the same thing to the German people. We can see what's coming on here. But this closing of Cody Wilson's website basically falls into that saying we have on one of the coffee cups we sell out of our website, which is the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it. And this is another case of where everybody can see the U.S. government acting as a dictatorship, taking away technologies that don't make them comfortable, constant monitoring of all of our communications without warrants. Everything that they're doing right now simply hammers home the message, we live in a dictatorship, we live in a dictatorship, we live in a dictatorship. This is not America. This is not even close. This is not even close to the illusion of what America was supposed to be. We were spoon-fed by those state-controlled public schools. Everything this federal government is doing is what we, in theory, fought a couple of world wars to oppose. Which tells us that this time we're on the wrong side of this coming world war, which means our nation will lose. Now, getting back to Syria. The attacks by Israel onto Syria is sending a message to the rest of the world that Israel is going to continue doing whatever it wants to do with impunity, protected at the Security Council by the United States of America, their slave, their ever-obedient, servile houseboy. And, of course, this bodes ill for the other neighboring nations. Israel can't seem to go for 6 months without attacking one of their neighboring nations. Iran, that we're being told is the evil empire incarnate, hasn't invaded another country in a war of aggression in over 200 years. The Arab states are urging the United Nations to take action against the recurring Israeli aggressions, and of course we know the Security Council won't be able to do anything because the United States will be up there going, oh, veto, 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 and that's it, like a trained dog. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations is basically Israel's trained dog. You know, speak, veto, speak, veto. That's how that whole thing works here. Now, of course, the backlash from the Israeli bombing and the inaction of the United Nations is that it is strengthening the political resolve of Iran and Russia and the rest of the Arab nations in the region. They have finally come to understand the U.S., left to itself, is not going to pull back on its policy of conquest and forcing the world back onto Bretton Woods. Israel will never stop its belligerent behavior. The UN can't do anything about it. It is now up to them. And we're seeing basically Russia's resolve is firming up. Iran's leader has sent a message. They will support the Syrian government, unlimited, and they've got money and weapons to send. So this thing is escalating out of control, which is, of course, what Israel wants. Israel wants the U.S. and Russia to blow each other up with nuclear bombs because then Israel gets to say, aha, we still have nuclear bombs. We're in charge of the Middle East oil fields, which puts them economically in charge of the world. That's what Israel wants, for the U.S. and Russia to blow each other up and leave Israel in charge of the small cinder block that's going to be left. We're going to take a break. Be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back into Syria here, I'm looking at the story about how the U.S. government has simply come in and shut down this website that merely had data files for 3D printers to make gun parts. And it's not like it's going to stop people from making gun parts. You can make high-capacity magazines in any sheet metal shop. There's no way for the government to know that you're doing that. And it reminds me very much of the years leading up to the French Revolution, the first of the French Revolutions, because they actually had several in a row, where Jean-Paul Marat was out there doing his amazing writings to rally the French people against their money junkies, and the only thing the crown could do was hunt down his printing presses and smash them, which they did over and over and over again, did not change the final outcome. And neither will this. Those 3D data files for the gun manufacturing using 3D printing, they're out there on the net. There is no way to get them back. And it's just absolutely the reality. We're going to grab a phone call here. Jeff in Georgia. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Thanks for taking the call. I'm going to kind of segue subjects here a little bit. I know that's kind of breaking news and caught up with a little bit on that 3D gun thing. Now, I wanted to bring up, I don't know if I saw it on what really happened today or not, but were you aware that the SEAL Team 6 guys, their families, are going to have a press conference today? These are the SEAL team that went down in that Chinook helicopter in August in Afghanistan?
Yes. We're waiting to see what they have to say.
Oh, it was awesome, man. I watched it. I'm not going to kill the fire of the thunder of it all. Amazing testimony from the parents. You know, this is a back-to-back.
Well, give us the high points. As you know, as long as you've got the information, please share.
Okay. Well, the guy that stands out to me, there's three families that spoke. The first family that got up, and his main point, I guess, or the takeaway from his conversation, was that during the funeral ceremony, when they brought the guys back over here to Dover, they did they had an imam actually do the ceremony, if you will. They translated the prayer, and it's just a total, you know, Muslim prayer, damning these infidels to hell, basically, and they did that over our military guys there in Dover. That was a shocking thing, at least to the family.
That seems like that's an outright propaganda stunt. I mean, there's no rationale for allowing it to happen other than to be able to wave around and say, oh, those gosh darn Arabs they're sending our children's souls to the dark regions. And again, that just reeks of a propaganda setup.
I understand that 100%. Again, that's just one of the things. Evidently, there were 7 or 8 Afghanistan fighters on that chopper as well. They were switched out at the last minute. There's all kinds of questions that come out when they start asking the questions that haven't been answered from their government.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other testimony from one of the parents was his son was a cryptographer for SEAL Team 6, never really knew what unit he was in, never heard of SEAL Team 6 actually said out loud until and this guy's from Philly. He's got a great accent. Until I saw Joe Biden in his tuxedo with half a load on up there talking about how we killed Osama bin Laden with SEAL Team 6.
Mm-hmm.
And on these families, that's, puts a target on their back, obviously. The government, I guess, was aware of that, but it comes out that all special forces activities in Afghanistan are consulted with Afghanistan Army and military leaders. So it basically is implying that the Taliban knew that 100 Navy SEALs were going to be coming from wherever they were when they did the bin Laden thing to wherever it was when they got killed.
Well, you need to understand, you're getting caught up in the official story here, because first of all, that wasn't Osama bin Laden they got. The real bin Laden...
I'm just telling you the parent.
I understand that, but we're running out of time on this segment, and I want to respond to a couple of those things. First of all, it wasn't really Osama bin Laden. We busted all those really horribly done fake photos they flooded onto the Internet to sell this hoax. Second of all, the initial news reports were it was the Pakistanis who raided the house. And then after it was all over, somebody said, we think that was Osama bin Laden. The American military command got it. President Obama said, quick, send in the SEALs, grab the body, we'll take credit for it. And by the time they realized it wasn't really bin Laden, they had already leaked it to the press and it was going to be this huge embarrassment. That's why they had to dump his body in the ocean, swear everybody else to secrecy, try this goofball, hastily done, phony photos of the dead bin Laden. And that's ultimately why President Obama didn't get the big PR boost from this he thought he was going to, which is why they had to try the stunt at Benghazi with the ambassador that also turned into an epic fail. They're really not very good at setting up these public relations hoaxes. You got about a minute left. Anything else you want to add to this?
I just encourage everybody to go check it out. I'm not affiliated with it. I was just totally blown away by it. And the title of it is called Extortion 17. That was the name of the flight of the Chinook helicopter that went down. It's still kind of old news. I don't think it's been totally updated yet on YouTube to show the press conference now that it's not live. But incredible testimony, or not testimony, just incredible questions. There was great representation there for congressmen to a couple of the generals. You guys would know them. They've talked on your shows before. They get up and speak as well. It's just a really cool thing. I think everybody ought to go check it out. If you think Benghazi's hot, you wouldn't believe this is as big as Pat Tillman's thing. I'll just leave it like that.
All right. Well, again, you're right, but we know the whole story from beginning to end is a complete fraud. Anyway, you got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to get back to the evolving situation over there in Syria. Israel's attack on Damascus, whatever its agenda really was, and I'm of the opinion that Israel's just going to go on attacking Syria until Syria strikes back, at which point Israel and the United States have their excuse for a direct military invasion by your children. Because those Israeli children are really too precious to risk in this kind of an operation. So the goal is to get your kids thrown over there and to throw themselves onto the Syrian bayonets. But the political backlash is, because it was an unprovoked attack by Israel, a violation of international law, completely without any justification whatsoever, Russia now has a justification to send in their troops to Syria. So it looks like if the U.S. continues to push this world war into a truly global nightmare, that one of the fronts is going to be across Syria and Iran. Meanwhile, Israel is making a big stink about this Russian arms sale to Syria, which includes the S-300 missile defense system. It's an air defense system. And Israel is saying, oh, you can't let them do that. This deal's been going back and forth for a long time, with Israel and the United States pressuring Russia, no, you don't want to send them the rockets. They really don't need those things. And, of course, Israel just proved that, yeah, Syria does need them. And Israel's even going so far as to say if Syria is given these air defense missile batteries, it's going to make enforcing a no-fly zone impossible. Yeah, that's kind of the point. And Israel's going on about what a destabilizing influence this is. Actually, quite the contrary. The S-300 is an area defense system, anti-aircraft. You do not use the S-300 to lob across the border and blow up somebody else's buildings, like Israel's doing to Syria right now. The reason Israel is upset about this is because the next time they fly into somebody else's country to blow up another chicken farm, which is what they got on this last invasion, there's a good chance their planes and pilots aren't going to be coming back, and they're going to miss those pilots. They won't miss the planes. The U.S. will just send more of them over there, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer. But basically, this is going to deny Israel and the U.S. unquestioned control of Syria's skies, which is what they've been getting. Another part of this arms deal, and this is where it gets really hairy, is Russia is now delivering, because of Israel's attack, Russia feels they have the political justification to deliver these supersonic cruise missiles. These are anti-ship sea skimmer cruise missiles. They fly faster than the speed of sound, faster than the phalanx can intercept. They're maneuverable. They whip back and forth. They dipsy-doodle. A ballistic intercept is impossible. Russia has been developing this to counter the American ballistic missile defense system, to counter the American systems that will say, oh, this rocket is coming in here, we're going to shoot it down, and Russia doesn't want to count on the U.S. missiles missing the intended target and killing another 747, like happened over Long Island, New York a while back here. So Russia is sending some state-of-the-art weapons with which Syria can defend their skies against foreign invading aircraft and defend their coastline against naval threats. And that's not going to be too hard, because remember, the Pentagon came out talking about these littoral combat ships, hideously expensive. They've built an entire fleet of these things, and the Pentagon is saying, well, they look cool, but they don't have adequate armor to protect themselves. The crews are really too small to be effective in a combat area. They don't carry enough weapons. They're not as radar stealthy as they were supposed to be, and apparently their Wi-Fi networked computer systems that run the ship are open to hacking from outside. Complete waste of money. And this is where we get back to this idea that just because the U.S. government has spent more of your money on weapons of war than the next 25 nations combined, 24 of whom are supposed to be allies, doesn't mean they've got an effective fighting force. It just means they've blown the money on all of these weapon systems for political reasons. Apparently Congress has voted through appropriations for a new tank program that the Army doesn't even want. And the Congress said, no, 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 we are going to spend the money on these, and you will take these and you will use these. And the Army said, we don't need them. We don't want them. They're not good. It's just a big joke. And the point of that is, just because the United States has the most expensive military in history doesn't mean it's necessarily effective. We're clearly not getting the bang for our buck. The F-35 is a good example. They've already spent more than the gross domestic product of Australia to develop this aircraft. They're already manufacturing them. None are actually deployed for active duty because the systems are still incomplete. They can't get that helmet fire control system to work. It can't fly in the rain, can't fly in the fog, can't fly close to lightning. Can't really survive in a dogfight because it's got lousy visibility to the rear. And even the Pentagon says it will not survive in a dogfight against the Russian equivalents that Russia's building for much less money. It's a horrible system. It's designed to spend money, to waste money, to keep all the defense contractors and their pet politicians happy, keep them all rich at your expense. And your kids, when they get sent into these war zones with these botched-up weapons, are going to die because of the greed of the military-industrial complex. I remember that whole big stink over the M16. Huge, huge scandal. The Army brass were invested in the M14 infantry rifle, and I think it was the M30 machine gun because they used the same ammo. And the thinking was it would make the logistics simpler. And they went so far as when Armalite came up with what would eventually be the M16, and they set it out for trials, the Army literally loaded the cartridges with the wrong kind of propellant. That jammed the gun, led to misfires. They had them out there in field trials in Vietnam. A lot of American kids got killed. They were found with their disassembled rifle and the cleaning kit trying to put it back together. And it was done to basically justify staying with the M14 that so many of the military brass were financially tied in with the provider. And Congress ultimately got wind of just how completely bogus this whole thing was, and held hearings and investigation and wound up telling the Army, look, you're going to go with the M16. It is clearly a superior weapon. And, of course, now it's become a global standard, along with all of its derivatives. And that's how this whole military-industrial complex thing works. It's about sucking money out of the society for weapons that may not really work or not, but as long as they're expensive and they're making lots of money, who really cares? And the people who pay for it, not financially, you're paying for it financially. Our kids in combat are being sent into combat with inferior weapons, hideously expensive. Remember the scandal over the body armor? This one company got the contract for all the body armor in use in the field. Soldiers were told, you will use this officially issued body armor. Turned out to not be effective. The guy made a huge amount of money through a $10 million bat mitzvah for his daughter, with all this loot that he was making off this inferior body armor. Families who wanted to send Dragon Scale, which is a superior body armor, to their kids in the war zone, were told if they did that, then if the kids still got killed, they wouldn't get any death benefits. It was all about supporting the established deals, the established flow of money. We've all seen camo out there, right? And we know that, back at the start of this whole rush to a new world war, there was basically the green camo and the brown camo, and that was it. Over time, virtually every individual branch of the service has now had to come up with their own unique camo identity, most of which isn't really effective as camouflage. The Marine version, they've got little tiny globe and anchors and all these other little symbols woven into the camo design to make it unique to the Marine Corps. And there's some 10 different camouflage BDU programs out there, which are hideous duplications, hideous amounts of expense. It takes about $500,000 to design and approve a new camo pattern. We've just got a story about that linked at whatreallyhappened.com. It's all about the money, making money. And those soldiers on the front lines, they're loaded down with equipment they may not need. I think the average loadout for a frontline soldier is something like 60 pounds of junk, most of which he's simply not going to need. And, of course, for places like Afghanistan, where it's very mountainous terrain, loading the kids down with that much weight of mandatory approved U.S. manufactured stuff slows them down, puts them at a disadvantage to the Afghanis, who basically are running around with a rifle and some ammo, and who know the terrain, because they're not really interested in the war and the kids on the front line. They just want to make another buck. Remember the scandal in Vietnam? They were just dropping all these bombs on empty lots. We think it may be a truck park. And it turned out they were bombing empty lots. Why? Because the bombs cost money. It was all about selling weapons, selling munitions, soaking the American taxpayer. And that's really what it was all about here. Now, Vladimir Putin, as long as he's on his tear about what's going on in Syria and Iran, has reiterated his concern that ever since the United States went into Afghanistan, the production of opium in that country, which had been virtually zero under the Taliban, has now just exploded. And a lot of that opium is now being sent into Russia. And Putin is very, very angry about that, because he knows it's been prior U.S. policy to use opium to suppress or destabilize a society or a segment of society. This is why during Vietnam, when Kun Sa's heroin was coming back into the United States of America inside those Vietnam body bags, it was primarily being dumped in the black neighborhoods. Same thing during Iran-Contra, when the cocaine was coming up from South America to fund the covert military support for the Nicaraguan Contras, and also, of course, to make all the players insanely, insanely rich. Where was all this cocaine and crack being sold? Primarily into the black neighborhoods. Out in Los Angeles, Freeway Ricky Ross was pouring this stuff into the black neighborhoods to keep the black people in their place. And I actually met him once through my first wife, Broadzilla. And he was openly saying, yeah, I'm working for the CIA, and as long as I'm working for the CIA, the police will never touch me. And they never did. So Putin does not want the same thing coming into Russia. And he's making a big stink about that. And by the way, we're already seeing today. Yesterday, when it became obvious Putin had thrown this brick wall in front of the invasion of Syria, I said, you watch. We will start seeing Russia bashing nonstop. Ooh, the bad Russians, they're bad. We may have to go to war against them. Do you want to go to war against nuclear-armed Russia and possibly nuclear-armed China just to prop up the Federal Reserve note? I don't think so. That's a really stupid reason to incinerate the surface of planet Earth, to keep private central banking in power. Israel, meanwhile, is now actively evacuating hired mercenaries from Syria to treat them in Israeli hospitals and send them back. So they're openly supporting this attempt to overthrow. U.S. is back to screaming, Assad must go. There will be no settlement without Assad's removal. They're trying to escalate this. Russia is trying to block it. Russia's the only one acting like an adult on the world stage right now. Everybody else are screaming children. McCain, Netanyahu, Obama, they're all like, oh, we gotta go to Syria, we gotta go to Syria. And Russia's saying, all right, children, calm down, or we're going to have to lock you out of the swimming pool. Now, over in Pakistan, their high court has ruled the U.S. drone strikes into Pakistan are illegal under international law. They're very angry that every time a terror suspect gets targeted, and by the way, there's no guarantee these terror suspects are actually guilty of anything. Remember, it's come out, the vast majority of people in Guantanamo are innocent of any wrongdoing. So we may infer that the vast majority of terror suspects targeted by these drone strikes are probably innocent of any wrongdoing. And for every one target they get, an average of 50 innocent bystanders are killed. Much worse damage and destruction than happened in Boston, and the corporate American media won't talk about it. And now Pakistan is saying their high court has ruled these are crimes under international law. They have ordered the Pakistan government to refer the matter to the International War Crime Tribunal. So there's going to be a war crimes trial about this, which, of course, the United States will completely ignore because they see themselves as above international law. We're going to grab a phone call. Clarence in Oklahoma. Osseo, my friend, what's going on?
CO to you too, Mike. And I just had to call in because, as I said, I don't call in just to hear myself on the radio because, well, back in college I was on it enough, and that was good enough for me. And but at any rate, when you mentioned the thing about the M16 and all the, you know, how they're messing with ammunition and how they brought that into being, well, I was in the Air Force, basically to keep being drafted in the Army back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in what they call the security police. And they put us through, and when I got out, I joined the reserve, they put us through desert warfare training, but basically kind of an Army basic. And that wasn't really our job, but that's what they said, you know, out in the desert north of Vegas. And I was thinking about a good friend of mine that I'd known, I mean, for years, that I worked with in, out at the local air base.
Okay, we got about 1 minute.
Okay, well, he said, you know, it's going to be a bad day when you draw your weapon out of the armory and it says so on the side you can tell it's Mattel. It's swell, you know, so...
well, no, that's actually true. Mattel made the plastic component. Yeah. No,
I've heard that they actually kind of got the idea from that, and now, with my memory being what it is, I forgot what my second point was, so I better let you go since we're getting close to...
All right, I'm sorry that I got you flummoxed and you forgot your second point, but that is actually true. When Armalite first started manufacturing the M16, they contracted with Mattel, which had an amazing injection-molded plastic facility, to make the buttstock and the foregrips, the plastic components.
Yeah, that's what it's made out of. Oh, and the other thing was, the 60 pounds you're talking about?
Yes.
I was on a training exercise out there in the desert, and we had to go out in the field and live in a tent, or live out in a foxhole, or whatever, and the pack I was carrying was 60 pounds.
Yes.
I mean, what? But I don't know. But at any rate, they put a PRC-25 radio, one of those ancient things, and they weigh probably another 30. That was 100 pounds, and back then I was in good shape and only weighed 150. So
Yeah, it is. It's all about selling product to the military, and these kids have to carry it, and it weighs them down. They can't move quickly and decisively when they're under threat. They're literally pinned down under the weight of all of this stuff. And now, rather than pull back and make our forces lighter and more maneuverable, now they're spending money on these robots that will walk along beside the soldiers to carry all this other extra stuff. They're going to sell them at taxpayer expense. Thanks for the call, Clarence. Going to let you go. Take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you're probably already aware, cosmologist, brain, Stephen Hawking did, in fact, boycott the Israeli conference over Palestine. Cambridge University's administration is trying to clean the egg off their face after trying to put out the story that Hawking was not boycotting Israel, that it was just medical reasons. And then Hawking came out and said, no, I'm not going because of what Israel is doing to Palestine. And this is very significant because Stephen Hawking, he's world famous. He has a lot of respect for all the work that he has been doing, the challenges he's had to overcome. This guy's a modern hero, and that's the reason he is in the Sir Isaac Newton chair at Cambridge University. And he's got tenure, not much they can do about that. And what's really interesting, the reason I'm bringing this up again, is everywhere you see this story being reported, Israel's megaphonies are piling on, and they're just trying to scream at him he's an anti-Semite. And what's going on here is, remember when South Africa's apartheid started coming apart at the seams? And the boycott of, well, everything coming out of South Africa finally caused that government to collapse. And the same thing is starting to happen to Israel. The boycott and divestiture movement is really taking hold because we recognize apartheid when we see it. Even the South Africans are saying what Israel is doing to Palestine is even worse than the whites were doing to the blacks in the former South African nation. And so this is a huge, huge support for the boycott movement. And it brings a lot of attention to the fact that Israel is an apartheid state. They color code the license plates. They're now trying to get this law with the United States of America that Israelis can travel back and forth from Israel to the United States without any kind of added paperwork, but Israel retains the right to refuse entry to Americans who may be of Arabic descent. That's racist. It's profiling. And we have all these American politicians lining up and saying, well, racism is wrong, but really we have to let Israel get away with it because they're special and they don't have to follow the rules the rest of the planet Earth has to. And so they're out there trying to find some way they can discredit Stephen Hawking. And the megaphonies are working double shifts out there. Israel has a very well-organized and directed online propaganda campaign, and right now they're totally focused on Stephen Hawking. And they're being so obvious about it, and their arguments against him are so completely groundless, they're just calling attention to themselves. They really are. All right, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Mark in Georgia. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, aloha to you, too. One thing I wanted to clarify, get my hands free back in my ear here, about this debt collector thing is, one, we were basically getting checks from these douchebags to settle the case.
Mark,
I'm sorry.
Mark, going to have to keep you over the station identification. Do not go away. I want to hear this, and I want to give you the time to tell the story fully. So stay on the phone. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Mark in Georgia about debt collectors, and apparently you are in a tussle with said debt collectors, and now they're trying to buy you off to drop the case. Would you please elaborate?
Actually, I wanted to clarify that third-party debt collectors do not actually own the debt. Generally speaking, what will happen is, say, Capital One, let's call them, will basically write off their debt, and quite frankly, it is common for them to have some kind of insurance that when somebody basically defaults on their alleged debt, which is just a bunch of zeros and ones, basically they are required by law to write this off. But when they get an insurance payment on what the alleged debt was, because that's part of the way their business model and how they operate, what they'll do is they'll turn around and sell the documents to a bunch of unscrupulous lawyers and other so-called debt collectors. And what they're doing is, with a third-party debt collector, they do not have a legitimate reason to pull your credit report, but that's what they do all the time. Now, like I say, the thing is, they don't actually have the hard copies. Generally speaking, they have a bunch of PDFs, portable document format, like Adobe Acrobat, where they won't even bother to print it out unless they need it. And they'll claim, oh, see, you owe us this debt. And it's like, no, you don't, because that debt was not transferred to these collectors. They purchased evidence of a debt for a tiny fraction of the face value of the alleged debt. Now, I'll tell you this much. I'm going to give both sides of this. One, the attorney in Gerald E. Moore and Associates flat out lied, saying I wrote 2 letters prior to filing suit instead of the second actual letter. I pointed out to him that the law does not allow credit cards because if you maybe sometime I'll give you the Pacer case number where you can go in Pacer and see the what happened back and forth. But basically, the attorney lied, and both the judge and the magistrate judge over him both went along with that lie, and they sanctioned me for over $3,000 in legal bills. But to their credit, they have not attempted to collect on it. So I do want to be fair that the judge went along with a lie, and that was unscrupulous for he, and I put in a motion to set aside, and the other judge above him went along with that lie and basically upheld the sanction, but they haven't tried to collect because I get the impression they know that I'm broke. So this whole thing is a scam in the sense that the debt collectors really don't have a lawful right to collect anything, and they will commonly cite Huertas versus Galaxy, where, for one thing, the plaintiff was stupid and clumsy in the way he went about doing things, and the debt collection agency was an in-house debt collector where it was legitimately assigned, unlike what they typically do is purchase evidence of a debt. What I'm saying makes sense about how they're in the fraudulent business of claiming
it is a fraud. It is a fraud. And when we were still talking with Bill Shaw about this kind of stuff, he made the point. These debt collection companies are knowingly breaking the law, but they do it with the assumption that 95% of the people they're contacting won't know the law is being broken, and they'll just turn over the money, and it's just more of this vulture capitalism. But if you can catch them breaking the law, and you know they're breaking the law, they'll back off, they'll settle the debt. And again, we live in a nation where the bankers, the money junkies, and the government view the laws as only something that applies to you, the serfs. And it's an attitude, right. It's kind of a legalistic apartheid system where the bankers and the politicians don't have to follow the laws. They only apply to us in the 99%. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Mark. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to step back a little bit to this U.S. government shutdown of the website that was providing the data files with which to print a 3D printed plastic handgun. And as expected, the data files are popping up all over the internet. Anybody who thought shutting down this website was going to prevent this data from getting out, they've actually made the problem worse. And again, it's not really an effective firearm, but it is on the same level as those ultra-cheap guns that were manufactured by the United States and then dropped all over France for the underground to use against the Nazis. And I guess that's what the U.S. government is afraid of. Guns they can't trace, guns that aren't registered to anybody. And apparently the Department of Defense is now claiming authority over all intellectual property in the United States of America and control over the Internet. Now, these are violations of the First and Second Amendment. It's also a violation of a principle called prior restraint. You're not supposed to compel an American to change their behavior prior to the commission of an actual crime. And there is nothing in this data file or its distribution that is breaking any laws. The creator of this data file placed it in the public domain. And again, it's another example of the government reminding us all we have become a dictatorship. You're only allowed to have the information the government will let you have. Remember, we were talking the other day about this bill to require all research done in the United States of America that is funded with federal money, which is most of it, to let the government decide whether or not the results of the study be made public. If that law passes, it means there will be no more studies questioning the orthodoxy of the global warming religion. There'll be no more studies published that question the safety of vaccines and GMO products. Basically, the open scientific inquiry model is being taken away. And we're going to wind up in a disaster like happened with the Soviet Union with Lysenkoism, where Stalin's government said, you will obey this scientific theory even though it was completely unproven, and it led to mass famine. Because we're getting into a very dangerous place where politicians honestly seem to believe that science is subordinate to politics, and that politics can drive the science, and it's never worked out. It's always been a recipe for national disaster. Science has to drive the politics. You have to start with the real world and then say how you're going to handle it. Not say, we want the people to believe in global warming, therefore we will only allow the science out that supports that. And this push for political review of all scientific research may come out of the huge embarrassment from human-caused global warming. And I'll give you a good example. Yet another study has come out today showing that in reality, the temperature of planet Earth has dropped by 3 degrees centigrade average over the last 5 years. But under this new law, you would not be allowed to know that, even though it is a scientifically established fact, peer-reviewed, all the data to support it, but for political reasons, we can't let you know the world is actually getting colder because our push for carbon taxes and a conformance to a global environmental authority demands you believe the world is getting warmer. And this is one of the biggest, most far-reaching conspiracies by government and industry and academia to defraud the people of planet Earth. It's fallen apart at the seams, and so now they're saying, oh, we have to control the science. Whether it's global warming or the fact that Viking actually did detect indigenous life on Mars. Curiosity may have done it. Remember, they were like 2 weeks into the mission on the surface of Mars, and they leaked out there. They'd found something that was going to rewrite the science textbooks. And then 4 days later, they said, no, nothing there, nothing there. We don't have anything. And I recognize it. I saw it back on Viking. So the plastic gun data files are out there. They're all over the net. A member posted them to whatreallyhappened.com, where you can download the zip file. And I'm not going to delete that post, on the principle that this represents an exercise of the First Amendment right to freedom of expression and the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Again, it's not an effective gun. We're dealing with a principle here. And again, go back and look at this thing in Ohio. Every emerging fact from this story is just a reminder. The police cannot, will not, do not prevent violent crimes. This idea from the gun grabbers that we can turn in all of our guns and rely on the police to take care of us is nonsense. The police don't take care of us. They don't protect us from crime. I mean, look at it. Again, the police, like everything else, it's driven by politics. The cops got called about a naked woman crawling around on her hands and knees at the back of this house, didn't bother going inside, but they'll kick down the door of people who've gone to hydroponics farming supplies so they can grow indoor tomatoes. And they'll kick down the door on that because, by golly, they may be growing that evil marijuana. The police don't want to deal with the real crimes. They want to deal with the politically important crimes or illusion of crimes. The police don't want crime to go away because then budgets start getting cut. That's the reason these cops didn't go into this house with these 3 women in there. That's why they're not busting the drug dealers. They need that crime out there so they can ask for more money next year. Oh, crime is out of control. We need more taxpayer funds. We need a new drone in the sky. We need the armored vehicle. We need the submicron imaging system to peek into people's houses. We need all of that because crime is out of control. It's out of control because they're letting it go out of control because that's how they get more funding here. Now, back to the Middle East. Over in Jordan, Jordan's parliament unanimously voted to expel Israel's ambassador and to recall their own ambassador from Tel Aviv. They're just tired of dealing with Israel. By the way, according to Bet Salem, they've gone back and done a study, and they've tallied up the victims of Israel's Pillar of Defense operation in Gaza, where they were trying to finally crush out Hamas and failed to do so, which provoked the United Nations to recognize Palestine as a state. And it turns out, no big surprise, during the 8 days of this operation, 167 Palestinians were killed. And only 69 of those were actual combatants. The rest of them were just innocent bystanders. They're just bombing everything in sight and hoping they get lucky, and they didn't here. Now, the other day, remember when I said this unprovoked attack by Israel into Syria, we could count on the corporate media to start cranking out all the old World War II, Hitler, Nazi, all this other stuff to remind us that we're supposed to feel sorry for the aggressors here and not feel any sympathy at all for the Syrians who are being killed in all this stuff. And so, sure enough, on our local cable TV guide, they're advertising this new special, Nazi America, a secret history, to remind you there are Nazis in America, and you've got to side with Israel, or the Nazis will take over America. They already have. Not these costumed actor bozos in this documentary. I'm talking about the ones on Wall Street in Washington, D.C., who have brought us into a state of a fascist economic dictatorship. They don't want you looking at those. We're going to wave swastikas at you. And a reminder, there are no real Nazis anywhere left at all. Not in Germany, not in the United States. They are all paid propaganda actors. And you know how I know? It's very simple. When you were a kid and you played cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians, you wanted to be the good guy. You wanted to be the cops, or you wanted to be the cowboys. The big kids would have to threaten the little kids to play the bad guys. You know, you have to be the Indian, you have to be the robber, and you've got to fall down when I point my finger at you and go bang, bang, although that'll get you kicked out of school now. Nobody wants to be the losers, and folks, the Nazis lost. They blew it. They failed. Nobody really wants to be the losers. They want to be the winners. And it turns out every time you find another one of these so-called Nazis and you start digging, you find out they're some propaganda operations actors. Back about the time of World War II, there was the American Nazi Party, which had a total membership of like 6, and they were getting all this press. And then the leader of the American Nazi Party got arrested for embezzling from his sponsor, which turned out to be the ADL. Alrighty, we're going to start a phone call here. Kent in West Virginia. We're probably going to have to keep you through the commercial breaks, so don't get nervous when you hear the music. What's on your mind? Kent, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. What's going on?
Oh, okay. Yeah, a couple of things. The guy with the plastic gun, he said he made it available, put it in the public domain. Now, did he have a patent on that? Because I happen to be an inventor, and I know that the Defense Department has a right to claim basically any patent. I'm reading from a filing receipt from the Patent Office. You have something called a foreign filing license, which they review everything for, if it's something that the military thinks is vital to the national security, they can keep you from filing foreign patent applications. And I'm not sure that they can't maybe just take it from you even for the U.S. patent rights. Of course, I imagine they would negotiate a payment for you.
Okay, now stay with me. We got to take a break for commercials, and when we come back, I'll explain why that may not apply in this case. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Kent in West Virginia about the Department of Defense legally being allowed to commandeer patent applications that have potential military use. And we actually ran a story about this, I think about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, where inventors all across America who had invested their time and their creativity and their own money into developing an invention they thought had industrial application would all of a sudden find the Department of Defense coming in and simply saying, we're going to take this because it potentially would have a military application and you can't have it anymore. And these poor inventors, after all this work and investment, they wind up broke. They don't have the benefits of, they're not compensated for any of this stuff. Now, the situation here is a little bit differently, because the only way the government could come in and charge somebody for a patent violation is if some company sets up to make these plastic guns and sell them. That's what patent law protects, somebody manufacturing and profiting from the invention. But there is no law in the United States of America that says that you in your own workshop at home can't build whatever you want to build, even if it is from somebody else's patented design. You just can't share it, you can't sell it, you can't give it away. And the real problem, of course, is one of enforceability. With this digital file already out there all over the net, the government can't possibly identify anybody who's actually building this thing, or if they do, they're only going to find one. It is a non-centralized, distributed manufacturing process. There's no way they're going to be able to control it, even waving the patent laws around.
Yeah, that's well, it's the patent office. Yeah, that's kind of tricky, and I really don't know what they can do as far as domestic. So you're probably right about that. I just happen to know that they have this foreign filing license. Another thing about the Bin Laden and the raid in Pakistan, I've come to believe that what was happening there is that the Pakistanis had custody of one of the doubles, Bin Laden doubles that the CIA was using, because that raid was in Abbottabad, which was, they made a big deal about that. That was a military fortress type of town. He was basically in military custody, and he was, whoever this victim was highly prized, because I heard reports, repeated reports on the BBC that the doctor who aided the CIA in that vaccine ruse to get the blood samples, they put him in jail. So I think what was going on is the Pakistanis had gotten hold of one of the Bin Laden doubles that the CIA was using, and was holding it as a leverage tool or something in the United States. And that was why they probably dumped the body in the ocean, because they didn't want it to withstand scrutiny and say, well, that's not Bin Laden.
No, they definitely did not want that. But what's really interesting to remember is if you look at the ear on any person, there's a configuration of the folds and indentations, and it is as unique to every human being as the fingerprints. And in fact, in cases where fingerprints and dental records are not available, very often matching an ear print becomes how you tell if somebody is who they say they are. And looking at the photos that were allowed out about this guy that they claimed was Bin Laden before he was killed, and you look carefully at the ear, it doesn't match the ear on the known confirmed photos, the pre-2001 photos of Osama bin Laden. So we know for a fact that wasn't him. And
we know that when this whole thing started, he was supposedly in Afghanistan, and we heard this crap about, well, if you just give him up, we won't invade you. And they said, well, we won't give him up, so we'll have to invade. So obviously we didn't invade and destroy Pakistan. So, I mean, obviously it was a phony type of deal.
Well, it was. I mean, what Afghanistan was actually saying is, we can't give you Osama bin Laden. We have no idea where he is. We don't think he's in our country. Oh, you're hiding him from us and the war's on. And it was almost a thing. It's almost like, that old "Where's Wally" thing. Where's Osama? And Osama seems to be rumored to be wherever the United States wants to invade next. And like I said, the original news report of what went down in Abbottabad was the Pakistani forces raided the house and killed the guy inside. After that was over, somebody said, we think that might have been Osama bin Laden. The American military chain of command got wind of this, and President Obama said, oh, we got to grab him, we got to stuff him and stick him in the rotunda of the Capitol building. And then, of course, when they finally realized, no, it wasn't Osama bin Laden, because somebody may have said, Mr. President, the real bin Laden actually died in 2001, but it was too late. The story was out. So they dumped the body in the ocean. They don't take any DNA samples or anything, and they flood the net with all of these very hastily, very poorly done, phony images trying to convince everybody that that really was Osama bin Laden they got. And it was an epic propaganda fail. President Obama did not get a huge lift off of it. And I think that's why in September of last year, when Romney was slightly ahead in the polls, they staged another phony terror attack at the Benghazi mission, which got out of control. The ambassador got killed. Now they're trying to backpedal from that as well. Kent, going to let you go here, take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And once again, our server is being hit with a denial of service attack, and we're trying to shut that down and block the offending IPs. There seems to be some people out there who don't like what we're talking about here. Now, the other day, we were mentioning how the World Jewish Congress had put out this idea, actually they passed a resolution calling for the global criminalization of Holocaust denial. In other words, asking any kind of questions or even daring to re-examine the orthodox revealed dogma of the history of World War II would result in prison sentences. And again, they're acting like they've got something to hide, because somebody who says they've seen Bigfoot doesn't have their career ruined. Somebody who claims to have been taken for a ride in an alien UFO isn't thrown in prison. Only in this one area of history are they bringing down the force of the courts of law to keep you from asking questions. And remember, truth needs no law to protect it. Truth survives re-examination. Truth is unafraid of questions. And when you see this kind of push for the global criminalization of Holocaust denial, they're afraid. They want to stop people from asking questions and looking at the evidence. And so much of that orthodox tale has already fallen apart. Science has caught up with the deceptions. We know that those bars of soap were not, in fact, made from human fat. They didn't have a lot of fat in them anyway. It was a wartime soap. And most of it is pig fat, which is kind of an embarrassment to all those cemeteries who buried those bars of soap. The story about the lampshades made from human skin, another fraud. It was goat skin, which was a common material for arts and crafts back then. No big deal. Ground-penetrating radar has shown at Treblinka there are no mass graves. The strata is exactly the way it was laid down by the last ice age. No signs of disturbance whatsoever. And it just goes on and on. So now today we're getting this story coming out of Veterans Today, where now there's a push to define Holocaust questioning as a psychiatric illness. Probably going to go right into that American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic and Symptoms Manual, which even the National Institute of Mental Health is saying has gone so completely out of control they can't support it any longer. But that's going to be the next push. Anybody who questions the orthodox view of history of World War II, they must be mentally ill. Only, sane people just accept that things happened exactly the way they're told by the corporate media, by Hollywood, and by those state-controlled schools. You have to be mentally ill to question the official story in anything, which, by the way, was a very common tactic in the former Soviet Union. Those scientists who stood up and said that Trofim Lysenko didn't have a clue what he was talking about with his Lysenko method for agriculture, they were thrown in mental institutions and kept there even after the Lysenko method failed and resulted in mass famine all over the Soviet Union, which is when the Soviet Union had to come to the United States and start buying surplus wheat, which, by the way, thanks to GMO, we don't have surpluses anymore. The United States is now a net importer of food. But that's the next thing. It's mental illness to question the official story. And that's another hallmark of dictatorship. Anyway. Now then, because of the Holocaust, and the Holocaust is basically the political foundation for the justification for Israel to steal Palestine. You know, it's in the Torah and the Talmud that the Jews have a divine right to the Holy Lands. Actually, no, because I've read those books. And what it says, and you can check out in the Old Testament in your own Bible, God gave, and then, by the way, later took away, the Holy Lands from the descendants of the 12 tribes that followed Moses, or Akhenaten, out of Egypt. The Ashkenazi, who are the majority population of Israel right now, are descendants from Central Asian Khazars who converted to Judaism about 800 AD. And the Bible doesn't mention them at all, let alone says they have a right to steal the land from Palestine. And to show you how silly this whole idea is, I wrote an article called Types with Tired Fingers. And it's on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. You take a look at it, share it with all your friends. Basically what it says is, I have decided to convert to one of the many Native American religions. And I came up with a Native American name because of my blogging activity, Types with Tired Fingers. And because I'm now a member of this religion, which was the religion of the original inhabitants of the North American continent, I'm calling on the U.S. government to simply skedaddle and return all the land to me because I am now a member of that religion. And you don't need to call in or email me and tell me what an absolutely silly, absurd notion it is. I know it is silly. That's the point I'm making. For these Central Asians to convert to Judaism and then come on down and say, God gave us Palestine. It's absurd. And, of course, the Holocaust is big business. It's just constant money coming out of the United States, constant money and submarines coming out of Germany. All this money to take care of the Holocaust survivors, and there shouldn't have been that many. The pre-World War II population of Jews in Germany was only 600,000, and most of those have now died. And it turns out it's just another scam because apparently this Shoah restitution has been hit with another fraud scandal. One of the people running this fund that was supposed to get all this money from Americans and Germans and everybody else to take care of the Holocaust survivors, they've been putting it in their pocket to the tune of $57 million. And I'll give you one more. There are two foundations that have adopted the name and legacy of Anne Frank. And by the way, there are reasons to look at that whole Anne Frank diary as yet another fraud, because Anne's father was actually sued by the ghostwriter who dressed up the diaries to turn it into a sellable story. So these two Anne Frank charities are fighting with each other over who gets the actual surviving artifact, and it's gotten to the point where they're calling each other Nazis. And it's all about grabbing the money. It's all about having, you know, that's really what's driving the whole thing. And they're actually destroying the whole Anne Frank legend, which is, you know, every school kid, you got to read the diary of Anne Frank. You know, Hitler and the Nazis were bad, the Jews were oppressed, and no matter what Israel does today, you must feel sorry for them. That's starting to fall apart here. All right, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Werner in New Brunswick. Aloha. Werner, what's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mike. I just turned in, and you mentioned there's a practice of oppressive governments to solicit the help of the psychiatric profession of psychiatric whores in achieving their dirty, in following up on their dirty business.
Yeah, it is. And one of the reasons why the National Institute of Mental Health has now dropped its support for this diagnostic and symptoms manual from the American Psychiatric Association is there are no laboratory tests for any of these so-called mental illnesses. It's all subjective. Psychiatrist simply says, I think you have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and I'm going to sell you a pill. And that means if the government is going to start demonizing those who refuse to follow the official line as mentally ill, there'll be no end of psychiatrists who are going to say, yes, I talked to this person, and they are definitely suffering a mental illness, and we have to lock them up and keep them away from the rest of the sheep.
As I say, Mike, I encountered the very same experience in 1975 and 76, where I was being put twice upon false accusations into a mental institution by the RCMP and by cooperating psychiatrists in order to cover up some of the most vicious hate crimes. And at the time, when I was locked up in that institution, we were listening to the radio, and at the time, it had been known to the West that in the former Soviet Union, they were putting people that didn't agree with the system, they were putting them into mental institution and basically declared it to be a psychiatric illness if they didn't prescribe to their benevolent communist system.
Yes.
And I thought, what an irony. And afterwards, I went after the psychiatrist, and when I went to get answers from him, I came in a decent way and everything. And when he didn't know what to say, he phoned up the police department and said, "This is an emergency. Send someone in right away." And I expected that rotten trick. I taped the conversation.
Okay, good. Always a good thing to do.
You know, and as I say, those psychiatrists, they're basically psychiatric whores for hire. You know, basically they're the stormtroopers for any kind of a dictatorship.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's all opinion and subjective. You know, and of course, because they make more money, the sicker they convince you are. They're always going to find something that is wrong with you that they are going to treat for a reasonable fee. And it's just another scam. And this diagnostic manual that the American Psychiatric Association has been putting out every year, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. South Park last night was making fun of that, where they were talking about sex addiction. Why is it that men with lots of money and fame just seem to want to have sex with a lot of women? It's actually instinctive. And now they're trying to treat it like a disease, and South Park did a wonderful job spoofing that whole situation.
Basically, it's the nature of the beast.
It is the nature of the beast, you know, yeah. And, you know, I'm happily married, and Claire and I get along. I have no interest in other women, certainly not younger. I'd feel absolutely inept. I have no idea what wine goes with peanut butter. And to be honest, I can't keep up with Claire. I don't have anything left over to go after other women. But I understand that for a lot of, well, Bill Clinton, good example. And by the way, they were caricaturing him in this South Park episode. Yeah, you know, guys who are big stars and celebrities and they've got lots of money, yeah. You know, I remember listening to Ron White talking about how he finally got his divorce because he was grabbing a little bit on the side. Yeah, we are instinctively wired to seek multiple partners because that actually accelerates the process of evolution. And look at any of our politicians or our clergy. I mean, they just busted another one for raping 6 women. You know, yeah, when you're in positions of power and authority and wealth, you're going to go with the flow, so to speak.
Well, as I say, and the flow has vastly changed in the places of authority, in the places of power.
Well, remember, those in positions of authority, they want all the available females to themselves. You know, you can't fool around, you know, but we're going to grab some on the side because we're special. We've got money. We've got whatever. And, yeah, it is. It's normal human behavior. But the diagnostic manual is saying, oh, it's sex addiction. Actually, sex is supposed to be addicting. Little clue there for you people.
Basically, it's makes a difference between a civilized man and uncivilized society.
Well, unfortunately, under the pressure from private central banking, our society is becoming uncivilized because when you have more debt than available money, sooner or later, your citizens start predating on each other to get those little pieces of ink and paper, and they start taking ethical and moral shortcuts. We're certainly seeing that in the pharmaceutical industry. We're certainly seeing that in the shoddy products that are being sold in our stores, and it becomes acceptable. More and more of these abuses, fraud, we're talking about all this fraud going on Wall Street, becomes driven by that desire to grab enough of those ink and paper tickets to get out of debt. And for every one fraudster who is succeeding in acquiring enough money to pay off his debts, it condemns a whole section of society to bankruptcy because, again, there's never going to be enough money to pay off all the debt by design. And so private central banking, along with bankrupting the country and driving us to wars, it is destroying the better part of our human nature. It's destroying what was best in the American society by simply driving us to further and further and more desperate acts to get those little pieces of ink and paper.
And that's generally a sign of a society before it becomes extinct.
Oh, well, we see the signs of collapse all the way around us, and again, the government is trying to make preparations where even as it all implodes, they still want to be in control of whatever's left over. And that's why they're out there grabbing the guns and grabbing digital files and saying, we don't have to obey the Constitution anymore. It's a national emergency. And by the way, apparently, President Obama has renewed the state of emergency that has been in existence since Roosevelt because of the concerns about Syria. Well, again, Syria hasn't actually attacked us. And there's no justification for a state of emergency based on Syria. But that's just the excuse. Every president loves all those extra powers that come with having that state of emergency. And every president since Roosevelt has renewed and extended the state of emergency for whatever excuse they can come up with.
Well, that's where would be an appropriate place for the psychiatric profession to do something useful in dealing with those basically paranoid and sociopathic leaders in high places.
Well, those paranoid and sociopathic leaders in high places are the ones handing out all the mental health grants. So they're not going to bite the hand that's feeding them. And again, for exactly the same reason, the medical establishment does not want healthy Americans because they can't make money off of them. The psychiatric establishment does not want well-adjusted, mentally sane, stable Americans. They want you neurotic. They want you borderline psychotic because then they can make money off of you.
Anyway, I thought I'd just give you a ring.
Well, thank you very much, and we're going to let you go. Let's see, we're coming up to the top of the hour when Sheriff Richard Mack is going to be joining us here. Amazingly enough, Fox News, which yesterday was just doing nonstop Benghazi hearings, they're now on to Jodi Arias and Prince Harry's visit, and it looks like Benghazi is turning out to be one of those scandals that might threaten the legitimacy of the entire government, and so now it's being dropped as a story. We're seeing this situation, the story reported over at WorldNet Daily, basically saying Benghazi makes Watergate look like kindergarten. And it was rather interesting on the Daily Show, I think it was Tuesday night, Jon Stewart was trying to trivialize this whole Benghazi thing and saying, oh, really, it's nowhere near as serious as Watergate, and obviously got his marching orders from the liberal political establishment. But it is a very ugly situation. And again, I don't think anybody's even really close to what that was all about. I have my own theory about what happened in Benghazi, and I think it was being fanned up right now as a GOP attempt to get Hillary out of the 2016 presidential race. And sure enough, today we saw this article over at Newsmax.com. Benghazi is likely to follow Hillary's 2016 presidential bid. And they're out there saying, Doug Schoen is saying, yeah, this is going to be a factor. This is going to be a factor to limit her ability to run for the White House. So, bingo! One more time, we called it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're about 5 minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're about 5 minutes away from joining Sheriff Richard Mack. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, one of the big revelations coming out of the Benghazi testimony was that the Special Forces unit that was on its way from Tripoli to Benghazi to protect the ambassador was ordered to stand down. And everybody's saying, okay, what's going on here? The Pentagon has now issued a statement saying the reason the Special Forces unit was ordered to stand down is they wouldn't have saved lives in Benghazi. There was nothing they could really do. And this is completely absurd. In a rapidly developing dynamic situation where, in theory, you don't know what's going down, you can't make that statement that they're going to get there too late to have any effect. There may be something else going on by the time they arrive. They're going to be useful. So this is a completely absurd explanation coming from the Pentagon. This whole cover story is falling apart. And again, what I think happened, Barack Obama did not get a huge PR boost from killing that guy that they claimed was bin Laden, and we know he was not. He didn't get a lot of traction from that. Must have been very, very frustrating for them. In September of last year, early September, the polls were showing Mitt Romney as slightly ahead. A lot of the corporate media was already proclaiming Mitt Romney was going to win, and Obama was going to be a single-term president. And Obama needed something to make him look good to the American voters. And I think what happened is, on the anniversary of 9/11, drag in that symbolism, they sent a special operations team pretending to be Al-Qaeda to kidnap and capture the ambassador. Then they were going to let the story build and build and build in the media for a week or 2 weeks, and then Obama would send in a SEAL team to rescue the ambassador. He'd look like a hero. He wasn't another Jimmy Carter who let it turn into an Iranian hostage crisis, and he would ride a tide of public approval into his second term. And I think once the shooting started, all of those Libyans living right around that area heard the gunfire and said, hey, let's join in. They're kicking out the Americans. And this carefully choreographed, stage-managed publicity stunt turned into a wild free-for-all riot and an epic fail. And now, of course, they're trying to basically backpedal, cover it up, make it all go away. And the GOP is going to keep hammering on this, not because they're going to get Obama, but they simply want to derail Hillary Clinton in 2016. And that's what's going on in this whole situation. All righty, let's see. A lot of stuff going on in the economy. By the way, interesting little story I just put up about all of the states that now have rainwater harvesting laws. The government's attitude is all your raindrops belong to us. And apparently quite a few states have now passed laws saying you cannot capture and use rain that falls on your own property. Even Hitler didn't do that. Even Stalin didn't do that. Can you imagine going up and, suggesting to Hitler we're going to ban Germans from using the rain that falls on their property? Hitler would have fallen down laughing at how silly and absurd that was. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with Sheriff Mack after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And apparently we're having some difficulty reaching Sheriff Richard Mack. And, apparently he's online right now. So joining us is Sheriff Richard Mack. And Sheriff Mack, nice to talk to you again after all these years since you were out here in Honolulu. Welcome to the show, and obviously you're here to talk about the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association upcoming convention. Please tell us what this is all about.
Well, it's all about the solution, and I believe that it's the only solution left, and it falls in line with what the Founding Fathers said. The purpose of the 10th Amendment was the purpose of state sovereignty, and it's really up to the states to be the ultimate check and balance on federal authority. The federal government was formed by the states. The first original 13 states formed the federal government. And then they assigned the federal government 17, maybe 18 things that they could do. They were only granted discrete enumerated powers. And that was rendered express by the 10th Amendment. In other words, it is only rendered, the federal government only keeps within their limitations and within their enumerated powers if state and local officials make it clear that that's where they belong. If the federal government is allowed to take money from the states and then turn that money around in forms of funding education and funding police departments and funding sheriff's offices and giving back bribes to the states and state employees and local officials, and then they take the bribes and decide to go along with the federal government because they're getting all this money, then it really destroys state sovereignty and the protections within the Constitution. So the money game, if not the money criminality of Washington, D.C. politics, has really shifted the paradigm of our thinking and of our local officials, and has really been a destruction of the Constitution. We at the CSPOA feel that it's time to shift this paradigm back to the states where the proper authority belongs, where power really exists. And Thomas Jefferson said that the top executive of the county was indeed the county sheriff. So we're trying to enlist, train, motivate all the sheriffs of this country, but deputies, peace officers, patrol officers, chiefs of police, and city councilmen, county commissioners, we're trying to make sure that everyone in state and local government knows and understands their duty and their responsibility to protect the citizens from the tyranny and incursions of the federal government. What's more important is the work we're doing is completely supported by the Supreme Court decision that I filed against the Clinton administration and won at the United States Supreme Court. We probably need to reiterate, 2 small-town sheriffs, yours truly and Sheriff Prince, ended up at the United States Supreme Court on probably and arguably the most powerful 10th Amendment decision in the history of our country. 2 small-town sheriffs beat Janet Reno, beat the Clinton administration, and win a landmark decision on the 10th Amendment. And all of that decision, the principles as expressed by Justice Scalia in this 5-4 split decision, all of the principles that he addresses in this decision completely and entirely support what I'm saying here. I'm only the messenger. I am not the creator of these principles. I'm talking about the Constitution. I'm talking about the 10th Amendment. I'm talking about the Declaration of Independence.
Okay, we got to take a break here. Sheriff Mack, I'm sorry, we got to take a break for commercials. Stay with us. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Sheriff Richard Mack from the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. Big conference coming up. And we have seen over the last few decades the federal government adopt a model of, we're going to take your money away from you, but we'll give it back as long as you do what we tell you to do. And it is so all-encompassing that they're openly advertising for people to be on food stamps, so you're going to have to do as you're told just to get tomorrow's lunch here. And I think this was a major reason, trying to avoid this was a major reason why the Constitution originally had a prohibition against direct, non-apportioned taxation. So the government couldn't simply grab the money and then pick and choose and decide how it was going to be given back, usually in exchange for some kind of obedience. And you're absolutely right. The 10th Amendment was originally put in there so that anything not enumerated in the Constitution was forbidden to the federal government. And don't forget that 9th Amendment, which said that any rights to the people in states not enumerated could be assumed. And so very clearly, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution were biased to keep all the power and authority with the people and the states and to limit that central federal government as much as possible, because the Founding Fathers understood it is the doom of political power that it's going to attract the very kind of people who should not be allowed to have it. And so they were intentionally trying to hamstring the federal government so that it was not likely to be subverted to the extent that, unfortunately, ultimately it turned out to be.
Yes, well, that's exactly correct. And the entire Constitution was written to keep the federal government in check. As Jefferson put it, the Constitution would be the chains by which our federal government would be bound. Well, that's no longer the case anymore. They're not bound by anything. They've even said publicly they can do whatever they want. That even the Constitution, because of the Supremacy Clause, allows them to do that, which is still utter nonsense and complete utter arrogance from any individual that says that. But really, our federal authorities, our federal representatives, I should say, as criminal as they are, they have to say that. They have to make up that excuse. Otherwise, they would be breaking the law. They would be admitting to being lawbreakers and criminals, and against the Constitution. So what they have to do is come out and say, well, the Constitution is antiquated. It doesn't really apply today. The Founding Fathers couldn't have known. And so we just kind of get to do what we want now because we're smarter than the Founding Fathers, and we want to make sure that things are happening to coincide with today's problems and that the Founding Fathers could have never envisioned. And
well,
so,
we're seeing a lot of that. In fact, PBS is just now starting a new multi-part series talking about how really the Constitution is completely outdated. And we saw these trial balloons in the New York Times about 2 months back about really it's time to just dump the Constitution. The federal government could operate much more efficiently and smoothly without all those silly little civil liberties rules. And my attitude about that is if the federal government wants to shred the Constitution, go ahead, because the entire authority of the federal government rests on that Constitution, and if they tear it up, they're basically resigning. Of course, I'm sure the boys in D.C. don't see it that way, but that's certainly the way we, the American people, should see it. When the Constitution is gone, with it goes the legitimacy and legal authority of the federal government.
That's true, very true. And so what we're trying to do is build these barriers, as Madison put it, erect the barriers. That in fact, he said that the states are supposed to erect barriers against the encroachments of the national authority. So what we're doing is we formed an entire national organization based on that premise, that sheriffs, chiefs of police, county commissioners, city councils, school boards, state reps, governors, would all exercise their due authority according to the 10th Amendment and erect those barriers against the federal government. That's why, and I'm saying this on anything. Do you want to stop the NDAA? How do you do that? One county at a time, county by county and sheriff by sheriff. How do you stop Agenda 21? How do you stop the United Nations and their abuse? How do you stop gun control? How do you stop the abuses and criminality of the IRS? We have the solution. And I'll tell you frankly, Michael, I can't believe that we're not getting everybody in the country just to go hog wild over what we're doing. Because we are the only peaceful solution that remains. And yes, there's other groups that are part of this, like Oath Keepers and Gun Owners of America and the John Birch Society, and there's others. We have lots of different shows like yours that are totally supporting what we're doing. Joyce Riley is coming to our convention. I would love to have you come as well. RBN would be more than welcome. We're totally opening this to the press. Every American citizen is welcome to attend. Again, all the information about what we're doing is at cspoa.org. That stands for Constitutional Sheriffs Peace Officers Association. You can sign up there, or you can send us a donation. Everybody can get involved in this in one way or another, because we're paying for this whole thing just out of grassroots donations from people that listen to your show. And what we want to make sure is that people see the legitimacy of what we're doing, see the patriotic nature of what we're doing, see the constitutional foundation that we're basing this whole thing on. We're not making any of this up. We are simply presenting a program and a plan of action to take back our Constitution, to restore the balance of power that the states are supposed to have anyway. And the best way we take back our country is one sheriff at a time, one county at a time, one city at a time, county by county, state by state. We take this country back, and if we have public officials that will stand against the tyranny of the federal government and stand for their citizens, just as we swore an oath to do in the first place, we can win this battle.
Well, it is going to take the support of ordinary Americans, and unfortunately, we're already seeing states are passing laws against NDAA, against Obamacare. Yes. We're seeing states like Kansas passed a law saying federal gun laws will be null and void within their state. We already know the Supreme Court ruled in Marbury versus Madison that laws by the federal government that are repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void and don't have to be complied with. The attitude we're getting from the federal government is, you will do as we say, or we're going to invade your state. The federal government is clearly getting ready to declare war against the 50 states. And so for the constitutional sheriffs and these peace officers to take a stand for our rights and liberties, we, the American people, are going to have to stand with them. Peacefully, non-violently, but we're going to have to basically stand up there and say, you know, this really is the grassroots standing up for our Constitution. Because as long as the federal government is not conforming to their constitutional limits, they're no longer the legitimate government of this land. I don't think they care about that anymore. No. As far as your convention, I want you to give us a few more details about that. I would love to be able to attend. I simply don't have the financial resources to do that. I'd love to come and speak to your your crowd, but certainly would love the opportunity for some live over-the-air coverage from the convention floor when it's taking place. So where and when is this actually happening, and how can people get information on how to attend?
Okay, good question. It is in St. Charles, Missouri, which is just outside St. Louis, about 25 miles outside St. Louis. So you would fly into St. Louis. We have representatives from Oath Keepers that are going to be picking people up. They're also running our security for us. We have several partners in this whole thing. Tea Party Patriots is another group that's helping us, Gun Owners of America. But so if you plan to be there, email us, and we'll pick you up and make sure you get to the hotel. It's at the Ameristar Hotel Casino in St. Charles. We have Chief Larry Kirk, a chief of police, who called us and asked us to have our convention there. He is on our committee. He has helped us get this rolling. He's been fantastic. We have Chief Mark Kessler from Pennsylvania also speaking. Sheriff David Clark Jr. from Milwaukee is our Constitutional Sheriff of the Year. He is a Democrat, but he has come out boldly in defense of the Second Amendment, even fighting his own party on this, and even fighting the chief of police in the same town. And it is just amazing who we have on our lineup. Again, everybody can get the information at cspoa.org. If you email us and want a flyer, we'll send you back a flyer so you can pass around. We want you to get local officials to attend. We want you to get your sheriff and chief of police and any of your friends and relatives that are in law enforcement or who might be patrol officers. We want you to get them there. And you have homework to do. It is free. Tuition and the meals on Friday the 31st, May 31st, are all free for public officials. Okay? So, in fact, I'll make you the same offer, too. If you can get there, I know you're kind of in a tough position being in Honolulu, but I love Honolulu. I'd love to come and pick you up and bring you out myself. But be that as it may, citizens are also welcome. Any public official is free to attend. For a citizen, it's $150, or if you come with someone else, and you can bring anybody else that you want, brother, sister, stranger, wife, girlfriend, buddy, doesn't matter. If you bring somebody with you, it's $100 a person. So we're charging that to the citizens who would like to attend so that we can have the public officials come in for free.
All right, we got to take another break here for commercials, and we'll be right back with Sheriff Mack after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Sheriff Richard Mack. We're talking about the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, their upcoming convention in St. Charles, Missouri. That's from May 31st through June 1st. And Sheriff Mack, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a banner on my website gratis for between now and the end of the convention, so maybe we'll drive some more interest over your way. Meanwhile, we got a caller on the line here. Art, no location given. Aloha, do you have a question for Richard Mack?
Yes, I do, Mike, and thanks for taking my call, and it's a pleasure to speak with you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
I wish I could attend the convention, but unfortunately travel is a physical difficulty for me, so I won't be able to. But you mentioned Sheriff Kessler. Chief Kessler.
Yes.
I am very impressed with him. Had an opportunity to speak with him a couple different times. He's got an excellent show, Rank and File, at 10 Central, 9 Eastern, 8 on the leftist coast, right here on RBN. So anybody not listening to that, you really ought to tune in and listen to him. Very knowledgeable man. But you mentioned earlier that, and here's where my question comes in. You mentioned earlier that many today, especially those in Washington, and of course we know what George Bush said about the Constitution being nothing but a duty piece of paper.
Right.
But many in Washington, and I agree with you, would say that the Constitution really does not apply in today's reality and whatnot. And this is actually evident in the words of one Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she was interviewed on Al Harat television over in Doha, I believe it was. about a year and a half ago, something like that.
Yes.
And where they were talking about Egypt and the formation of their new constitution. And she actually made the statement that she would not look to the United States Constitution because it is so old and outdated. She would more or less look toward maybe something along the lines of what Africa has done, or a couple other countries. And my question to you, sir, would be, if you had the opportunity to address Ms. Ginsburg on this issue, what would you say in response to that statement? And I will take my answer off there. Thank you, gentlemen, and you have a great day.
Well, that's really a good question, and it's a really a good point. And I've heard Ruth Bader Ginsburg's quote on that, and it's typical of what Washington, D.C. politics thinks of our Constitution. But she doesn't get to make that determination. She has sworn an oath to uphold and defend our Constitution, whether she likes it or not. And so you have to understand that first and foremost, the Constitution was based on principles of liberty, not opinions of our founding fathers. That we leave people alone, and that we get government to stay out of our lives, and that we keep government small and insignificant, and that we let people run their own lives as long as they're not hurting anybody else. And this was the first time in world history where the experiment of government went to the ultimate power of the people, not to the power of government. And so that's why she doesn't get it. She wants government to control our behavior. She wants government to control every facet of our lives. That's what Washington, D.C. has evolved into, as a tax master, and that we have some sort of lawful obligation to pay people money who don't work, and that we now call the welfare state charity. Well, forced charity is not charity at all. It's tyranny. And so that we're all forced to pay this money to help people, whether we like it or not, that we have the IRS that's crazy out of control, committing all sorts of crimes to go after people who don't pay an unlawful and unconstitutional tax, and that we continue to put government at the head of everything, and that the federal government can do anything and everything it wants. That's the kind of thing that Ginsburg wants. She's wrong. She ought to study the history of America. She ought to study the Federalist Papers and the principles that our founding fathers fought and died for. And if you start to study that and see the significance of what the founding fathers did, you'll see that this was all an experiment in personal liberty, and she doesn't get that because she doesn't understand our history or our Constitution or the principles of freedom that we were founded upon. And so she's just another typical example of Washington, D.C. politicians who fight against our Constitution, even though she swore an oath to defend it and promote it and obey it.
Well, I'd like to add a comment here because, like I said, we've been seeing these trial balloons about the Constitution is outdated. Well, there's an easy fix for that. It's called the amendment process.
Yeah.
If the Constitution needs to be changed legitimately, Congress will pass a bill suggesting a new amendment. It goes to the states. 3/4 of the states ratify it. The Constitution is changed. Of course, we know they have previously played very fast and loose with the ratification process. They could get away with that 100 years ago. They can't get away with that today. And so because they understand the states will not ratify any more centralization of power changes to the Constitution, that's why they're trying to simply say, we need to get rid of it. We need to bypass it. We have all of these violations of our Fourth Amendment, First Amendment, Second Amendment. They're just trying to run roughshod over it, and they're going to continue to do so until we, the people, stand up and say, no, when you leave that Constitution, you cease to be the legal government. We have to take a break for commercials. More phone calls when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking with Sheriff Richard Mack of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. We're talking about the upcoming convention. We've got a couple of callers waiting on the line. Before we go to them, though, I want to hit this point one more time. The federal government is legal and legitimate only when it operates within the restrictions imposed on it by the Constitution. That Constitution is the original contract with America. It is the contract under which we allowed the federal government to manage this nation for the benefit of we, the people. When the federal government exceeds its authority, when it tramples on our rights, it ceases to be the legitimate government of this land. And remember, we do have a United States Supreme Court decision, Marbury versus Madison, that states laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. We don't have to wait for the Supreme Court to say this is unconstitutional. We, the people, have a right to say what the government is doing violates the Constitution, therefore I refuse to go along. We're going to go to the phones now here. Mike in Colorado. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mike, are you there?
I can't. It blanks out.
Okay, Mike, why don't you fix your phone issues? We're going to switch over to Kyle in Philadelphia. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike and Sheriff Mack. My question is, how much do you think our current predicament is based on the public's general lack of the Constitution, the workings of government, natural law, etc., things like that, and how much better would we be served if everyone just had a basic understanding of how our system of government is designed to work?
Well, there's no question about that. Jefferson said that if you expect to be ignorant and free, you expect what never was and what never will be. In other words, ignorance is enslaving, and we don't teach the Constitution or basic fundamentals in our schools anymore, and that was specifically designed that way so that we raise a bunch of socialist liberals in this country. Our colleges and universities don't teach constitutional principles or government principles that our founding fathers talked about. Show me one public school that has a school book or a government book or a history book that tells what the founding fathers said about the Second Amendment. I actually, after I left the sheriff's office, I taught government, senior government at Thatcher High School in Arizona. I was appalled at the curriculum and at the books, but you don't have to be appalled after you figure out that the NEA is the one that devises the curriculum that we have. And so it's pretty easy to understand how these things happen when we don't teach these principles in our schools. And, you know, we've been raising liberals for the last 30, 40, 50 years in this country, and it's starting to take hold. And so, yes, we cannot keep our freedom, we cannot keep our Constitution if the American people are ignorant of what those are supposed to be.
You know what's really amazing to me, let me get a comment in here, Kyle. What's really amazing to me is we're always hearing this debate back and forth about whether the Ten Commandments should be on display in public buildings, you know, forgetting that there's actually a couple of different versions of those. What should be on display in every single government building is the Bill of Rights. That should be there for everybody to read when they're standing in line so they understand there are supposed to be limits on the federal government, and it is up to we, the people, to remind that federal government, peacefully, I hope, that they are basically in violation of that contract with the people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I've always been astounded at how teachers on both the high school and college level try to make opinions out of things that are facts, such as the immunity powers of the president and Congress, when these things are clearly spelled out and nobody has the knowledge. Nobody has the information. I think that would solve 99% of our problems in this country.
Well, we know the education system is completely co-opted not just by the government, but by the banking industry. In 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was signed into law, the public school system immediately dropped the Currency Act, King George III's Currency Act, and yet if you go back and you read the writings of Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, it was that Currency Act ordering us to conduct all commerce using banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. That was the prime cause of the Revolution. These days, they don't even mention that in public schools. It's all about the Tea Tax and the Stamp Act and these other issues, and the Currency Act, you have to be in a college-level history course before you even get wind of that as the cause of the American Revolution.
Well, and now some of the schools are actually teaching that the founders were terrorists and that the Boston Tea Party was done by a bunch of terrorists and criminals. And so, again, they're rewriting history. They're making sure that our students get a completely different view of what really happened and what our founders did and the sacrifices they made for us so that we could live in a free country. And now we actually embraced the very programs and socialistic ideals that we fought how many wars to stop, at least World War I and World War II, where we've had actually millions of our soldiers sacrifice their lives to stop the influx of socialism and communism across the world, and now we're embracing those very same ideals now. But we're trampling on the graves of these men. We're trampling on the graves of our founding fathers, and it's really a sad time in American history, and I'm going to tell you, this is the most critical time in American history since the Civil War. And
I would agree with that.
I absolutely beg everybody to get involved with us on this solution. We still have time to take our country back peacefully. Imagine if, just as you were quoting Marbury versus Madison, imagine if we had sheriffs and local officials defending our right as Americans, standing with us as we refuse to obey these ridiculous unconstitutional laws today. The easy one right now to choose on that is Barack Obama's health care law. How ridiculous and absurd. And I'm going to tell you right now, I am not going to comply with that. And if they take me to prison, then I'm going to sue my sheriff, because the local officials should be protecting me from such abuse. And it is none of the federal government's business how I do my health care.
That's absolutely true. The government is not authorized to do that. And let's see, the other comment I wanted to make about that, by the way, I disagree with you a little bit. I know our present government is surrounding itself with the trappings of socialism in order to convince the American people that what is being done is somehow for their benefit. But from a purely economic point of view, we have descended into outright fascism, which is, of course, the alignment of financial corporations' power and the government against the general population, which is what's led to TARP and all these bailouts.
I don't disagree with that at all.
Okay.
No.
We're going to go back to the phones here. Mike in Colorado is back. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. How are you doing today?
Doing good. Do you have a question for Sheriff Mack?
Yeah, Sheriff, there's organizations like yours and state organizations where these sheriffs are getting up and thumping their chests about nobody's going to take our guns, no way, as long as I'm alive. But yet, they're taking big federal handouts for stuff.
Well, some of them are. Some of them are. And we're training, and hopefully we're going to stop that too. We train against that. The National Sheriff's Association trains sheriffs how to get more grants. We are training sheriffs to stay away from that. It's all part of Agenda 21. I know what that is, and we are having experts speak at our next convention about Agenda 21. Even if it wasn't part of Agenda 21, what we have said earlier, we've already been talking about this, Mike, that taking federal grants is wrong, that it's a bribery system, that the federal government has no business doing in the first place, and local officials grabbing their share of the money is absolutely wrong. I hope that local officials will stop sending them money to Washington so they can't play this extortion game with the states and local officials. Yeah, we're totally against that, man.
All right. Well, listen, Mike, we're going to let you go here because we're running out of time, and I want to give the microphone back to Sheriff Mack. But again, this is a scam, and it is not in the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution originally prohibited non-apportioned direct taxation, so that the federal government couldn't get into this game of taking all your money away from you and then offering to give it back as long as you did what you were told. They're using your own money to control and coerce you, and that's why even as they talk sequestration and cuts to Social Security and Medicare, they're out there spending tax dollars to advertise for people to come onto food stamps, because once you're dependent on the federal government for your next meal, you will do as you are told. You know, and the White House is going to call up and say, I have good news and I have bad news. The bad news is we need to take your children and fling them onto the bayonets of the Syrians. The good news is it's pizza night. So, Sheriff Mack, yeah, go ahead, Sheriff.
Actually, that's a good point. And you know, for all of us to continue to be on the public dole like that and to have our hand out to Washington to please feed us, please take care of us, please educate us, take care of our health care. We're all dying in the streets, and they fabricate this crisis of health care across our country and parade these poor people around that didn't get health care done right. And so No, this is just a farce.
It's
there
enforced
has never been
dependency.
a better spinmeister than Barack Obama in Washington.
It's enforced dependency. And again, we're right back to the circumstances that led to the Declaration of Independence, where the British Crown forced you to be dependent on the Bank of England for your money, forced you to be dependent on the British East India Company for tea and cotton and all the rest of that stuff. Enforced dependency is slavery. And that's why after we kicked out that last government, we celebrate the day as Independence Day. We don't call it Freedom Day. We don't call it We Kick the British Out Day. It was the day when we stopped being forced to be dependent on government and big bankers and started to chart our own course into the future. And, of course, government and the money junkie bankers hate independence. They want you dependent. They don't want you able to grow your own food. They don't want you able to have your own currency. They don't want you to make your own medical choices and healthcare choices, possibly curing your illnesses with stuff you're growing in your backyard. They want you dependent on big pharma, dependent on big oil, dependent on private central banking, dependent on the government. Dependency is slavery, and that's why they're pushing this agenda of making you dependent on them for everything. We were talking earlier in the show about all these ridiculous laws that are cropping up all over the place where you're not even allowed to collect the rainwater that falls on your own property. They want you dependent on the big privately owned water utilities. We have the CEO of Nestle was out there saying the other day there is no natural right for fresh water, that water is just another product to be owned by corporations and commoditized and commercialized so that you will pay your money for it. And that's really the agenda. Enforced dependency is slavery. We need a new push for independence. I don't care if my standard of living goes down. It'll be my standard of living and not something the government has designed for me at huge expense.
Very good point. The whole strategy of all of this is, you're right, the enslaving of Americans. And the easiest way to do that is to remove the Second Amendment, remove our right to keep and bear arms. And remember, the Second Amendment only guaranteed that which was already in existence at the time, that which we were born with, and that is the right to choose our weapon of choice in defense of our family, our liberty, and our homes.
Well, on the Second Amendment, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're running out of time. I'm going to have you back on the show just before the convention opens. I'm going to have you back on the show here. We need to frame that Second Amendment debate in light of this huge embarrassment for the police in Ohio, where they did not prevent this kidnapping. They didn't find these girls for 10 years. It's an epic fail. Obviously, we see time and time again the police are not able to protect us from violent criminals. The courts continue to rule. There is actually no legal obligation for the police to intervene in a violent crime. Common sense, taking out the whole idea of revolution and tyranny and throwing those away, because they're threatening to a lot of Americans who are dependent on the federal government. We need to frame the Second Amendment debate. We, the American people, have a right to keep and bear arms equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals, which includes all those criminals getting military-style weapons from the U.S. government's fast and furious gun-running operation. There is no counter-argument to Americans being allowed to have guns in their homes that are capable of scaring off these kinds of criminals. And we really need to keep the Second Amendment debate on that level. And the idea about the Second Amendment, it is reserving to the people the right to say no to the government, and that's really what they're trying to take away, the right and the power to say no. After they get the guns, they're going to come for your gold and silver and for your children for more of these wars of conquest.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. Absolutely. You're right on target there. And we are, again, at the CSPOA, we are shifting this paradigm. We are fighting every bit of that. We're fighting every abuse from the federal government, yes, and some state government. If we have hundreds of sheriffs in this country standing, as others have done, in our sheriff who told the FDA that he would arrest him if he didn't leave the Amish farmer alone in Indiana, in Elkhart County. If we have hundreds of sheriffs standing and defending the principles of liberty with our citizens, with our posses, with Americans, we can win this battle. But if we sit back and don't get involved in this process, we're going to lose this one too, folks. And so I beg each one of you listening today, get involved with us in this holy cause of liberty that we're doing at CSPOA. come to the convention or donate and make sure that your sheriff and others can get there, and call them and ask them to go. It's May 31st, St. Charles, Missouri, Ameristar Hotel. Get more information at cspoa.org.
Okay, and we do have that link to whatreallyhappened.com, and I'm going to put up a permanent banner from now through June 1st, so you'll be able to click it and get this information and spread the word. It really is coming down to the grassroots. One of the problems we have with so many of these state governments, especially since the amendment that transformed senators from being appointed by the state governors into an elected office, that really stripped a huge amount of power away from the state governors. And sadly, too many of our state politicians see their present job not as serving the interests of the people of the state, but as a stepping stone for the eventual promotion to Washington, D.C. That is a very corrupting influence, which is why, well, Jan Brewer in Arizona, good example. Arizona's legislature passed a law to make silver and gold legal tender in Arizona. Jan Brewer vetoed it because she wants to move to Washington, D.C., and she knows she's not going to be able to do that without the blessing and contributions of the Federal Reserve. So that's,
yeah, she knows that, and people that try to act like she's some stalwart conservative and she's big tough because she stuck her finger in Obama's face for a photo op, she has been nothing but a go-along pro-government.
All right, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with Sheriff Mack for the last segment of our show after these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We've been talking with Sheriff Richard Mack and his upcoming convention, where they're trying to build a grassroots movement for we, the American people, to support our local sheriffs and peace officers who are going to take a stand against this unconstitutional, illegal, and illegitimate federal encroachment into our lives. What we have today in this land is not at all what was intended by the Founding Fathers. We have seen the federal government metastasize into this horrible cancer on what used to be the greatest nation on earth. We're seeing it with this constant attempt to loot wealth from the people, to give to the bankers, to give to the war machine, to give to Israel, where they're pushing harder for a national security state. The mayor of Boston is already out there saying they're going to double the number of TV cameras watching the streets of Boston, forgetting that the TV cameras they had there did not stop the Boston bombing, whatever you think is really behind it. Everybody's pushing for more and more of those same agencies that clearly did not work. They failed, and yet they want to take more of your money to put more TV cameras. They're afraid of you, is what's going on. The government is absolutely afraid. The American people have awakened from this media government hallucination that we've all spent most of our lives in. If you want the Matrix metaphor, we've taken the red pill and we're seeing what's really going on around us, and that's why they're just desperate to read our emails, surveil our computers, listen to our phone conversations, scare us into being silent, take away our guns. They're very much afraid of us right now, and we've seen all the stories about purchases of hollow point ammunition. The federal government is clearly preparing to declare war on the 50 states, and we, the 50 states, have to be prepared to defend our homes and our liberties from this coming federal attack. What the government is doing to Syria and Afghanistan is about to happen here in the United States of America. Drone strikes on terror suspects to scare us all into remaining silent and obedient. I don't think it's going to work. And maybe that's because I'm an old guy and I don't have a lot of time left to live anyway. I'm not going to go along with that agenda. I will not live my remaining life on my knees. Getting onto my knees is easy. Getting back up is proving to be harder and harder, and so I'm just not going to go along that direction. Sheriff Mack, we got 1 minute left. Anything else you want to tell our listeners?
Well, it's amazing your insight as to what's really going on and putting it into proper perspective. I hope that we can still keep this movement for freedom in America peaceful. That's what I've dedicated my life to. I hope that everyone will join me in this as we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. When the Founding Fathers did that, they really meant it. I wonder if we really do today, or are we just addicted to finding out the horrible things going on and then do nothing about it? I will not stand by and watch this anymore. I've dedicated my life to this. I hope that you'll join with us. please be with us at this convention. It will change America if we get enough support on this.
All right, well, there's the music. It's time for the show to end. Sheriff Mack, I will have you back on this show again before the start of your convention. We'll have you on for an entire hour again, and we can talk about what's going on. We have to head on out of here, get some errands done. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, please go out and share what you know with who you know. There are millions of Americans starting to ask important questions. We need to guide them into Republic Broadcasting and whatreallyhappened.com so that they can learn the answers and make good choices. Thomas Jefferson said, the highest duty of an American citizen is to keep themselves fully informed so they can make good choices. Talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.